It was a cold, quiet night when the news of a shocking death spread across the small town. The man at the center of the story was someone everyone knew, a loving husband, a father, and a friendly neighbor. But behind the calm appearance of his everyday life, there was a dark secret hidden from everyone's eyes. No one could have imagined that his life would end in such a suspicious way, leaving behind more questions than answers. Everything started just a few weeks before his death. Whispers were already floating around about his marriage problems. Those who lived nearby often heard heated arguments coming from the couple's house late at night. At first, everyone thought it was just normal disagreements between husband and wife. But what no one knew was that these arguments were much more serious. The man's wife had recently discovered something that shattered her whole world. Her husband was having an affair. The betrayal cut deep. They had been married for over 15 years, sharing everything, from happiness to struggles. They built a life together, raised children, and faced the ups and downs of life side by side. But now, all those years of trust were broken in a matter of seconds. The wife found out through a simple mistake, a message on her husband's phone that wasn't meant for her. That one text opened the door to a truth she never wanted to face. The woman he was secretly seeing was someone close to their family, a friend who often visited their home. The betrayal felt even worse because it came from someone she had trusted. Once the truth came out, their once happy home turned into a battlefield. The fights became louder, and the tension in the house was almost visible. The wife's pain and anger filled every corner of the house. People around them started noticing the changes. The husband, who was always seen with a smile, now walked around with a tense face. He avoided eye contact and barely spoke to anyone. His wife stopped coming out of the house. Neighbors whispered about what might be happening behind those closed doors. But no one could have guessed that everything was heading towards something much darker. Just a few days before his death, the man was seen at a local bar, alone, drinking heavily. Those who saw him said he looked disturbed, as if something was weighing on his mind. Some say he was having problems with money. Others believe the affair had pushed him to the edge. But whatever it was, the man looked like he was carrying a secret that would soon lead to his final moments. On the night he was found dead, everything seemed normal at first. He had come home late, as usual. The lights in the house were off, and the street outside was quiet. But what happened inside those four walls remains a mystery. The next morning, his lifeless body was discovered under suspicious circumstances. The position of the body, the small details at the crime scene, everything pointed to something far more sinister than an accident. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said he took his own life out of guilt. Others whispered that someone close to him might have been involved. The police were called, and the investigation began. But the more they looked into the case, the darker the truth seemed to become. What happened in that house that night? Was it a crime of passion, an act of revenge, or something even more twisted? As the investigation unfolded, secrets began to surface. Secrets that would shock everyone who thought they knew this man and his family. Behind every marriage, there are stories that no one ever sees. Hidden moments, silent battles, and unspoken truths. From the outside, they look like the perfect couple. He was a hard-working man who always provided for his family, while she was a devoted wife who stood by his side through every storm. But behind closed doors, cracks had started to appear long before anyone noticed. Their marriage wasn't always this way. In the early years, they were inseparable, laughing, traveling, and dreaming of a future together. But with time, those dreams slowly faded. Financial struggles, endless responsibilities, and the daily routine of life started pulling them apart. The love that once held them together became buried under the weight of unspoken frustrations. Yet, even in those tough moments, the wife never imagined that the man she trusted the most was living a double life. It all started with small changes. Late nights at work, unanswered phone calls, a sudden interest in dressing better. At first, she thought it was nothing, just stress from work. But deep down, a small voice kept whispering that something wasn't right. The man who once couldn't wait to come home now found excuses to stay out longer. The distance between them grew wider, but she kept brushing off her doubts, convincing herself that it was all in her head. Until one night, everything changed. It was just an ordinary evening. The husband had left his phone on the table while he was taking a shower. A single message notification lit up the screen, a heart emoji from an unknown number. Her heart raced as she picked up the phone, her hands trembling. What she found next shattered everything she believed in. Long conversations, secret meetings, and promises of love, all hidden behind the screen. The man she had loved for years had been lying to her, living a secret life behind her back. Her world collapsed in that single moment. She felt anger, pain, and betrayal all at once. How could the man who promised to love her forever break her trust so easily? The confrontation that night was explosive. He tried to deny at first, but the evidence was too clear. Every lie, every excuse, every secret message came crashing down like a house of cards. But what hurt the most wasn't just a betrayal. It was who the other woman was. She wasn't a stranger. She was someone they both knew, a close family friend who had been around them for years. Someone who had smiled at her, shared meals at their table, and acted like a sister. The betrayal cut deeper than she could ever describe. The wife was shattered, but she wasn't the kind of woman who would suffer in silence. The once calm and loving woman turned into someone completely different. Her heart was filled with rage, but she tried to hold herself together, at least in front of others. But inside those walls, the tension became unbearable. The house turned into a prison where every glance, every word, carried the weight of betrayal. Friends and neighbors began noticing the change. The wife, who was always warm and friendly, now barely spoke to anyone. The husband walked around like a ghost, always distracted, avoiding conversations. Some thought they were just going through a rough patch. Others suspected that something much darker was happening behind those closed doors. Despite the tension, the husband continued his affair. He thought he was being careful, but every lie left behind small traces: a perfume scent on his shirt, hidden receipts, late-night calls. The wife started collecting every piece of evidence, silently, waiting for the right moment to confront him again. But as the days went by, her anger began turning into something more dangerous. The walls of the house echoed with their fights. Harsh words were thrown, threats were made, and the air was thick with hatred. The wife was no longer the woman who cried herself to sleep. She became colder, calculating every move. Some nights, the neighbors could hear loud arguments echoing through the thin walls. But by morning, everything would be silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. No one really knows what was happening inside that house. But those who lived nearby swear they saw the wife sitting alone by the window late at night, staring into the darkness with eyes full of rage. Some even claimed they heard muffled cries coming from the house in the dead of night. Despite everything, the husband stayed. Maybe he thought she would eventually forgive him. Maybe he underestimated how deeply he had broken her. Or maybe he simply had nowhere else to go. But what neither of them knew was that the storm inside the house was slowly building. A storm that would soon destroy everything. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the house grew heavier. The wife's anger simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the perfect moment to explode. And the husband, trapped between guilt and desire, kept walking straight into the danger without even realizing it. No one could have guessed that this silent war between husband and wife was about to take the darkest turn imaginable. What started as betrayal would soon become something much more sinister, something that would leave everyone questioning what really happened behind those locked doors. The night everything changed was like any other, quiet, still, almost too normal. The clock ticked past midnight, and the streets outside were wrapped in silence. Inside the house, only the dim glow of a single lamp lit the living room. The air felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding on to the tension that had been building for weeks. No one knows what exactly happened in those late hours. The husband had come home later than usual. His face looked tired, but there was something else, something hidden beneath the surface. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was fear. The wife sat on the couch, her eyes fixed on him as he walked in. They didn't exchange a word, but the silence between them spoke louder than any argument. Every step he took echoed through the house. He went straight to the kitchen, pouring himself a glass of water with shaking hands. The sound of the glass clinking against the counter broke the silence for a brief moment, but it quickly returned, thicker than before. The wife's cold eyes followed him from the shadows, her face calm but unreadable. He sat down at the table, trying to act like everything was normal. But nothing had been normal in that house for a long time. The weight of his lies hung over him like a dark cloud. He knew she was watching. He could feel her gaze burning into him, but he pretended not to notice. Deep down, he must have known that something was coming, but he still hoped that night would pass like all the others. Minutes stretched into hours. The wife barely moved from her spot, her mind replaying every betrayal, every lie, every sleepless night. Her heart was broken, but the pain had turned into something colder, something far more dangerous. She wasn't the same woman who cried herself to sleep just weeks ago. That version of her was gone. Around 2 a.m., the husband's phone buzzed on the table. He flinched. The wife's eyes flicked toward the screen. Another message, another secret. His fingers moved quickly to hide it, but it was too late. The small smirk on her face showed she had seen enough. The silent war between them had just reached its breaking point. The argument that followed was unlike any other. Voices echoed through the empty house. Sharp, angry, full of years of built-up resentment. Every word cut deeper than the last. The wife demanded the truth, but the husband's lies only pushed her further. He denied everything, even with the evidence staring him in the face. His calm mask was starting to crack. The shouting stopped suddenly, a heavy silence filling the room. No one knows what was said in those final moments. Maybe she threatened him. Maybe he begged for forgiveness. Or maybe the truth had finally come out, the truth neither of them wanted to face. What happened next remains a mystery. By morning, the house was silent again. The husband's lifeless body was found lying in the bedroom. His face was pale, his body stiff. The first thing that caught the police's attention was how strangely calm the crime scene looked. No signs of forced entry. No struggle. Just a man lying dead under suspicious circumstances. The wife stood by the doorway when the authorities arrived, her face emotionless, her hands steady. She told the police that he had gone to bed late, and when she woke up, he wasn't breathing. Her voice was flat, almost rehearsed. But something in her eyes didn't match the calm tone of her words. As officers looked around the house, they couldn't ignore the strange atmosphere that lingered in the air. The bed was perfectly made, too perfect. The glass of water on the nightstand was still half full. The wife's nightgown had no stains, no signs of panic. Everything looked staged. But the strangest part was the locked bedroom door. Neighbors said they heard loud voices around 2 a.m., but the wife claimed she hadn't heard anything. The inconsistencies in her story raised even more suspicion. The police began searching the house, collecting every piece of evidence they could find. Hidden in the kitchen drawer, they found a small bottle of sleeping pills. Half empty, in the bathroom trash bin, there were tissues stained with blood. On the husband's phone, there were dozens of messages from the other woman. The last one sent just minutes before he died. Despite all the clues, there was no clear answer. The autopsy report would later reveal traces of sleeping pills in his system, but not enough to kill him. There were no bruises, no signs of violence. His cause of death was listed as undetermined. Rumors began spreading like wildfire. Some believed the wife had finally snapped, taking revenge for years of betrayal. Others thought the husband had taken his own life out of guilt. But there was one theory that no one dared to speak out loud. The possibility that someone else had been inside the house that night. The investigation was far from over. But one thing was certain. Whatever happened in that house was far more twisted than anyone could have imagined. And the deeper the police dug, the darker the secrets they uncovered. As days passed, the town couldn't stop talking. Everyone had their own version of the story, but no one really knew the truth. Behind those closed doors, something unspeakable had happened. Something that would haunt everyone involved for years to come. The investigation into the husband's mysterious death sent shockwaves through the small town. Police officers moved in and out of the house, collecting evidence while trying to piece together what really happened that night. At first glance, everything seemed ordinary, too ordinary. The crime scene was almost too clean, as if someone had carefully erased every trace of what had unfolded behind those walls. Detectives began their questioning, starting with the wife. Her voice was calm, too calm for someone who had just lost her husband. She told the officers the same story over and over, that she had gone to bed early and woke up to find him lifeless. But the more they listened, the more her story began to fall apart. Her eyes were dry, her hand steady, and there was something chilling about the way she spoke, like someone who had already accepted what had happened long before that night. The neighbors were next. One by one, they shared what they had heard. Most of them mentioned the heated arguments that had become a regular occurrence in the house. Others spoke of strange noises in the middle of the night, muffled cries, furniture moving, and the sound of breaking glass. But what stood out the most was what happened on the night of the husband's death. Several neighbors swore they heard shouting around 2 a.m., followed by complete silence. The police turned their attention to the husband's phone, a treasured chest of secrets. The messages between him and the other woman painted a picture of a man trapped between two lives. The affair had been going on for months, hidden beneath lies and excuses. In one of the last messages sent just hours before his death, the mistress had written, "I can't wait until you're finally free." But he never replied. Investigators discovered that the husband had been planning to leave. Not just his wife, but the whole town. He had secretly booked a hotel room 2 days before his death, but he never checked in. His bags were still packed in the trunk of his car. It was clear he wanted to escape, but someone or something had stopped him before he could. The wife's behavior became even more suspicious. She refused to let anyone into the bedroom where her husband had died, claiming she needed time to grieve. But when the police finally searched the room, they found faint scratches on the floor, as if heavy furniture had been moved recently. There was also a faint smell of bleach lingering in the air, though the wife insisted she hadn't cleaned anything. As the investigation deepened, whispers about the wife's dark side began to surface. People who had known her for years described her as quiet and kind, but with a temper that could ignite like fire when pushed too far. Those who got too close to the family often noticed how her smile never quite reached her eyes. Some said she had always been a little too controlling, especially when it came to her husband, but she wasn't the only suspect. The mistress quickly became a key figure in the case. When questioned by police, she broke down in tears, claiming she had nothing to do with the man's death. But her alibi was shaky, and her phone records revealed several unanswered calls to the husband on the night he died. What was she trying to tell him? Or was she trying to warn him? The deeper the police dug, the more tangled the web became. Every clue seemed to point in a different direction. The sleeping pills found in the kitchen hinted at a slow, calculated plan, but there was no proof they were enough to kill him. The lack of struggle suggested he had died peacefully, but the scratches on the floor hinted at something far more violent. One chilling theory began to circulate, that the wife and the mistress might have been working together. Two women, both betrayed by the same man, united by hatred. The police couldn't prove it, but the thought lingered in the air, casting a dark shadow over the case. Yet, with every passing day, the case became colder. The lack of hard evidence left investigators with nothing but suspicions and half-truths. The wife remained in the house, moving through the rooms like a ghost. The mistress disappeared from town, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. But there was one last piece of evidence that would send shivers down everyone's spine: the security camera across the street. On the night of the husband's death, the camera captured a blurry figure standing outside the house at exactly 2:15 a.m. The figure stood motionless for several minutes, watching the house before quietly slipping away into the shadows. The police tried to identify the figure, but the footage was too grainy. Was it the wife, the mistress, or someone no one ever suspected? With no solid proof, the case remained open, haunting everyone who had been drawn into its twisted web. The small town was left divided, some believing the wife had finally taken her revenge, others convinced that the truth was far more sinister. But one thing was certain: whatever happened in that house was not an accident. Someone knew exactly what they were doing that night, and the truth, it was still buried deep beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. As days turned into weeks, the shadows surrounding the husband's mysterious death grew darker. The police investigation slowed down, but the rumors in the small town only got louder. Every whisper carried a different version of the truth. Some believed the wife had finally reached her breaking point. Others were certain that the mistress had played a hand in his death. But there was one question on everyone's mind. If it wasn't suicide, then who really killed him? Despite the lack of solid evidence, the wife remained the center of suspicion. Her cold, emotionless face became a topic of endless gossip. The way she moved through life, as if nothing had happened, sent chills down the spines of those who watched her. She barely spoke to anyone, locking herself inside the house where her husband's life had come to a tragic end. The same house where every wall seemed to hold a secret. But beneath her calm exterior, something far more disturbing was hidden. People who knew her closely began to notice small, unsettling changes. Her once warm smile had disappeared completely. Her eyes, always full of life, now looked empty, as if she had buried every emotion deep inside her. Some neighbors even claimed they saw her talking to herself at night, pacing around the house in the dark. The police kept a close eye on her, waiting for a crack to appear in her carefully built mask. But she never slipped, not once. Every interview, every question, she answered with the same cold precision. There were no tears, no breakdowns, just a hollow voice repeating the same story. But behind closed doors, the wife was fighting her own demons. The weight of her husband's betrayal still burned inside her. His affair had destroyed everything she had built, every memory, every promise. And now, even in death, he had left behind nothing but unanswered questions. But was she grieving or hiding something darker? As the investigation continued, the mistress became harder to track down. She had left town shortly after the husband's funeral, disappearing without a trace. But the police discovered something strange. She had been withdrawing large amounts of cash from her bank account in the weeks leading up to his death, money that no one could explain. Had the husband been paying her off? Or was she planning something even more sinister? The deeper the police dug, the more twisted the story became. They found phone records showing late-night calls between the wife and the mistress just days before the man's death. Conversations that neither woman had ever mentioned during questioning. What were they talking about? Were they enemies or accomplices? One theory began to take shape, that the two women bound by betrayal and hatred might have joined forces to plan the perfect crime. The mistress would lure the husband deeper into the affair, while the wife silently gathered every piece of evidence against him. And when the time was right, they would strike together, leaving behind a scene so clean, so carefully staged, that no one would ever be able to prove what really happened. But without hard evidence, the police couldn't charge anyone. The case remained trapped in a web of lies and half-truths. The only certainty was that the man hadn't died by accident. Someone had made sure of that. The weeks dragged on, and the town slowly began to move on. The wife became nothing more than a ghost, trapped inside the walls of her empty house. The mistress vanished completely, leaving behind nothing but rumors. And the husband? His name became another unsolved mystery, another dark secret buried beneath the surface. But even as the town tried to forget, the house stood silent, holding on to the truth that no one could ever prove. Late at night, some neighbors claimed they could still see the wife sitting by the window, staring out into the darkness with cold, empty eyes. Others swore they heard footsteps echoing through the house when no one was supposed to be inside. The case may have gone cold, but the whispers never stopped. Because in small towns like this, secrets never stay buried forever. And the truth, it always has a way of coming back when you least expect it.